The global chessboard of military power is in a state of tension most haven't seen in years. And at the very center of that shifting strategic landscape is one of the United States Navy's most powerful symbols of force. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln CVN Phase 72. When a supercarrier like Lincoln changes course, it isn't just another routine naval movement. It's a message, a major recalibration of strategic priorities in an unstable world. In early 2026, the Lincoln was ordered out of its operating area in the Indo Pacific and redirected toward the Middle East, specifically into the U.S. Central Command's CENTCOM area of operations near Iran. This redeployment marked yet another dramatic shift in the carrier's nearly four-decade history, one that has seen it launched into crises ranging from the Persian Gulf to Asia. The reason this movement is significant isn't simply the shortening of a naval mission. It's the fact that it leaves a gap in the Indo Pacific at a time of intense strategic competition, raising pressing questions about how the U.S. will maintain deterrence in both regions. The Lincoln is part of Carrier Strike Group 3, centered around a Nimitz-class supercarrier, one of the largest warships ever constructed, displacing over 100,000 tons and capable of carrying nearly 90 aircraft. When fully embarked, this strike group brings the flexibility of sustained air operations, electronic warfare, precision strike capability, anti-face submarine warfare, and layered missile defense, all from a floating base of operations that doesn't need foreign permissions to sit offshore. Originally, Lincoln was conducting operations in the South China Sea and Philippine Sea as part of its Indo Pacific deployment, working to counterbalance China's growing military assertiveness in key flashpoints like the Taiwan Strait and the broader Western Pacific. During that time, it conducted drills and patrols intended to reassure allies and deter potential aggression, symbolizing US commitment to maintaining free navigation and stability in a region in which global commerce heavily depends. But in mid-January, as tensions between Washington and Tehran escalated, driven by concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions, regional proxy conflicts, and mounting internal unrest in Iran itself, the Pentagon made the strategic decision to pull Lincoln out of that theater and send it westward. By the 19th of January, ship spotting data showed the supercarrier transiting the Straits of Malacca, headed toward the Indian Ocean en route to the CENTCOM region. By late January, the carrier and its embarked carrier Air Wing 9 had officially crossed into the Middle East theater. This redeployment is not a one-off occurrence. In recent years, the U.S. Navy has repeatedly redirected carriers from the Indo Pacific to respond to crises in the Middle East, illustrating a pattern of prioritizing emergent hotspots when threats spike. For example, the Lincoln itself was once rerouted in 2024 to the Middle East, after leaving the Indo Pacific in favor of operations against Iranian-aligned forces. These repeated shifts demonstrate the Navy's operational flexibility, but they also raise long-term questions about how the U.S. balances global commitments. For decades, the Indo Pacific has been the central focus of U.S. strategic planning, particularly given China's rapid military modernization and expanded maritime footprint. U.S. defense doctrine has increasingly emphasized great power competition, and aircraft carriers have been at the heart of that posture, deployed to deter Chinese aggressions and reassure allies in East Asia. The presence of carriers like Lincoln helped maintain a balanced power dynamic in sea lanes critical to global trade. Now, with Lincoln operating under U.S. Central Command, that balance has temporarily shifted. Lincoln's departure from the South China Sea and adjacent waters has left only one U.S. carrier assigned to the Indo Pacific, USS George Washington CVN Phase 73, which is ported in Yokosuka, Japan. However, the George Washington was reported to be undergoing a maintenance period around the time of these developments, with its air wing in various stages of certification. That means for some period there is effectively no fully deployed U.S. carrier strike group actively on station in that vast and strategically vital region. This temporary carrier gap has significant strategic implications. Aircraft carriers serve not only as offensive platforms but as deterrents. Their physical presence can dissuade adversaries from provocative moves. Their absence could embolden those who wish to challenge the status quo, particularly in contested zones like the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and even areas closer to the Korean Peninsula. Many analysts argue that a sustained carrier presence is essential to signaling US resolve and preventing miscalculations by rivals. So who's covering the Pacific now? In the absence of a forward FA-deployed carrier strike group, the U.S. Navy has leaned more on forward FA-based Allied forces and other naval assets. Forward FA-deployed destroyers, submarines, and even amphibious assault ships such as the USS Tripoli can contribute to deterrence, especially when operating alongside Allied navies like those of Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Those assets, augmented by U.S. Air Force fighters and bomber task forces periodically deployed to bases in the region, work together to maintain a multi-FA-layered presence despite the absence of a carrier. Still, these measures are compensatory rather than equivalent replacements for a carrier strike group's unique capabilities, particularly around rapid, high-FA-end crisis response. A carrier's ability to launch dozens of aircraft daily, sustain long FA-range strike operations without foreign basing rights, and operate in contested airspaces is unmatched by other surface combatants or air assets. While destroyers and submarines offer critical capabilities, they don't replace the strategic breadth and visible deterrent effect of a carrier. The U.S. move also highlights how global military resources are increasingly being pulled in multiple directions. As tensions rise in the Middle East, the United States simultaneously faces strategic competition with Russia in Europe and China in the Indo Pacific. Each theater demands attention. And while U.S. forces have traditionally been capable of simultaneous multi-FA regional deployments, the intensification of threats in one area forces hard choices about where to allocate top assets like aircraft carriers. It's not only carriers being shifted. Reports indicate that the United States has been moving other military assets, including Air Force fighters, tankers, and surveillance aircraft, toward the Middle East to reinforce its posture amid the Iranian crisis. The buildup reflects a broader commitment of the U.S. military to be ready for a spectrum of contingencies in the region, even as diplomacy continues. The strategic calculus behind the Lincoln's redirection is rooted in deterrence theory, putting maximum credible capability within reach to dissuade hostile action. Iran, which has been expanding its missile forces, relying on proxy groups across the Middle East, and testing U.S. resolve, represents a volatile strategic flashpoint. The arrival of an aircraft carrier strike group in the Arabian Sea puts us carrier FA-based aircraft within effective range for strike and reconnaissance missions, as well as establishing sea control and air superiority if needed. Critics of the redeployment, however, argue that this approach risks overextension and may weaken deterrence elsewhere, especially against near-FA peer competitors like China. Some voices within defense circles are advocating for a leaner and more flexible force structure that relies less on supercarriers and more on distributed networks of autonomous systems, smaller surface combatants, and allied integration. These arguments stem from the recognition that the era of peer competition demands a diverse set of tools rather than an over-reliance on a few massive platforms. Nonetheless, for the moment, the Lincoln remains positioned where Washington believes it is most urgently needed, near the Iranian theater. Its presence amplifies US deterrent posture and reassures regional partners that the United States is committed to stability and security amid uncertainty. But this also underlines the fundamental challenge of great power strategy in a multipolar world. Resources are finite, threats are simultaneous, and strategic prioritization becomes a matter of complex, high-stakes judgment. In the eyes of allies and adversaries alike, the temporary thinning of U.S. carrier coverage in the Indo Pacific has palpable implications. China's military leadership is closely observing these developments, interpreting them within the wider context of U.S. commitment to its own regional security assurances. Regional allies such as Japan and Australia are watching to see how the United States balances its attention between traditional flashpoints and emergent crises. Ultimately, the Lincoln's redeployment embodies a central reality of modern geopolitics. Global volatility demands flexibility and responsiveness, but flexibility sometimes comes with unavoidable trade chaos. As long as Iran's crisis continues and the threat calculus remains high, the Lincoln will continue to play a leading role in the Middle East deterrence posture. Simultaneously, U.S. naval planners are working to ensure that gaps in strategic theaters like the Indo Pacific are mitigated via Allied cooperation and other naval assets.